Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing a review of Shubeik Lubeik by Deena Mohamed. This is a fantasy graphic novel that was originally published in Arabic in Egypt, but has recently, just January 2023, been released in the US by Penguin Random House, translated into English by the author herself. This is such a fantastic graphic novel that I thought was doing so many cool things, and I just want to tell you all about it with the hope that you will pick it up as well. So first, let me tell you what the story is about. This is an alternate version of our reality, except that in this version of our reality, there are things called wishes. So wishes are a natural resource that are mined, often from places like Egypt, and then bottled up into different classes of wishes. So first class wishes are extremely expensive, but also extremely effective. And you can get all sorts of things, cure a very big illness or get a, flying car, these sorts of things. And there are second class and third class wishes, where third class wishes are something that is not very easy to use. They're not as expensive, but they're more like a monkey's claw in that they often grant your wish in a way that isn't quite what you wanted, isn't quite what you expected. And in this world, we are following basically a shopkeeper who has inherited from his father 3 first class wishes, which is something that normally you would not see at just a regular little shopkeeper's store, but he is in debt and he finally decides that he needs to sell these, but nobody expects them to be sold at such a place, so he's putting them at great discount and just trying to get rid of them. And so we follow kind of what happens to these wishes, who buys them, who uses them, and it forms 3 parts of the book as each of those 3 wishes is used, and really discusses a ton of interesting things. So it is a really fascinating story. Now let me tell you what I loved so much about this story, starting with the artwork. I think that this graphic novel has excellent artwork. It is generally black and white, although there are some sections that have color, especially in between the 3 parts where we follow the 3 wishes, kind of the general story that is tying it all together. Some of those will be in color, but most of the book is in black and white, and it is just very stark in terms of the contrast between that black and white and the way that the lines and the shading is used. It just provides such emotion and such movement and such impact, and I thought that it was just so effective the way that this illustration was used. I also loved the way that space is used, the layout, kind of the graphic design of it. Also, there are sometimes visualizations that are really effective in talking about the information, but also talking about the emotions. And so I just thought that the artwork in this was really, really effective. I also loved how realistic the world building in this is. So this is definitely a fantasy story. We have wishes, magical things happen, but it's very mundane in this world. This is just sort of the same way that people who have a lot of money can access all kinds of, medications or things that are not available to people who don't have as much money. And these wishes are just a commodity. They're a resource. They are an economic force, but it's very, very realistic the way that all of this is done, and so much of the story is actually focusing on the regulation of wishes. So governments have regulations, and we see the way that laws are enforced and the way that the economy of wishes is used. It's very, very realistic, and I love that kind of mundane aspect of this world building for such a fantastical thing as magical wishes. There's also these sections that are in between the 3 main parts that often will do sort of a PSA style info sheet that is sort of the sort of thing that you expect the characters in that world to be reading. Like maybe they come across it on the news, or maybe this is posted in their school, and it provides information for the people in world to be aware of the way that wishes are used and just kind of be good consumers. And it just feels so realistic, like you could just imagine that existing. And the way that just the kind of details of how this is integrated into people's lives, it feels incredibly believable, and I love that kind of world building. The characters in this were also so fantastic. I felt such an emotional connection to the characters in each of the parts, and just you get to know them and get to know their struggles and their hopes and their desires, and you see them trying to figure out how to obtain a wish or what they want to do once they have a wish, and trying to figure out what the right thing is to do. These first class wishes are big deals. They're really, really powerful. And so there's a lot of question of like, what's the best use of this, and who should have access to them, and what sorts of things are valid uses of such an important wish. And I think that you just get so drawn into the characters' lives and into what they're going through. For example, one of the parts follows a college student who's dealing with a lot of depression, and you feel his depression and you feel what he's going through and the struggles that he has, and trying to figure out what can he wish for, what is it that he needs, and trying to work through his depression, and how can magic work with that. And you just feel the emotions of the characters so deeply, and you also see some character growth, and it's just really, really very engaging emotionally as well. And then the thing that I think I probably loved the most about this graphic novel is the way that it explored social issues and sort of used this idea of a fantastical version of a reality that has wishes to explore a lot of interesting topics. So one of the topics it explores is the idea of colonialism and the exploitation of, third world countries. So this idea that places like Egypt are the source of a lot of the resource, the wish resource, but that they're not the countries that are generally benefiting from them, that a lot of foreign colonial powers have a history of extracting those wishes and then taking them and bottling them up and selling them to their own people, and just this whole kind of dynamic of what the relationship is between these foreign governments and the local governments, and how a lot of local laws and beliefs are shaped by colonial forces who are trying to basically take advantage of them. I think it's just fantastic kind of global politics discussion. I also think that class is really well discussed in this, because we have this shopkeeper who, it's basically like a kiosk type of shop, not the sort of place that you would get a first class wish, which is on the order of, hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? But he's inherited these, and he doesn't know how to get rid of them, right? Because it's not the sort of thing that people would buy. So he puts them at a great discount, which means that we have people buying these wishes and using these wishes who would not normally do it. And so there's a big discussion of class and who has access to this kind of power and who doesn't, and how that affects their lives differently, and what it means for somebody who is higher class to have access to a wish versus somebody who is lower class to have access to a wish, and what it costs them, and all of these sorts of questions. It's really well explored in here. I think that corruption is another thing that's explored really well, because there is so much legislation and regulation of wishes. You have to register a wish when you get it, and there's only, for some types of wishes, there's only certain kinds of uses that you can have, and there's maybe outlawing of certain types of kind of styles of wishes and these sorts of things. So there's all of this idea of a lot of government and legal regulations, and how that is enforced, and how it's enforced for people of different classes, and what kind of corruption governments and law officers and all these sorts of people have when choosing how to enforce that and who to enforce that with. Another thing that is explored that I thought was so fascinating, it was really given a lot of room to be explored, was the idea of religion and how that interacts with the idea of these wishes, because according to a lot of this sort of classical Islamic scholars, these wishes are haram. They are not allowed. They're against kind of what you should be doing. And so for somebody like the shopkeeper who is very devoutly religious, what does that mean? What does that mean to be involved, to have these wishes, to be selling them, to think about how people are using them? What are the implications? And when you follow the tenets of Islam, and a lot of which are about mercy and kindness, how does that interact with the idea of these wishes, which are haram, but when people have need of them and when it saves a life, how does that interact? And so a lot of these moral and ethical and religious discussions are explored really in depth in such a really fascinating way. Overall, I think that Shubeik Lubeik is just such a fantastic fantasy graphic novel. If you like graphic novels at all, I think you should for sure pick this up. I think that the artwork is great, the storyline is great, the ideas that are great, and it's just such a fascinating story with so much heart to it and so much to say about like contemporary Egyptian life through this fantastical lens. I really hope that lots of people will give this a shot because it is just such a cool graphic novel. If you guys have read this, I'd love to hear from you, or if you're interested, or if you read other graphic novels that do similar things, especially in translation, I'd love to hear about it. Just leave me a comment down below.